Hello. Hopefully this is working. Hello, hello. Right, well, it seems that everyone can hear me, so that's good. No major issues with the old streaming software. So, hello. Yeah, the reason I saw some of you asking why it was so relatively early, I know it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the UK, it's probably some ridiculous hour of the morning in the USA. So, basically the reason I had to move it up is that Mrs. Drack had to go and help out her extended family up north, and she's coming back about 7:30 UK time, which was originally what I was going to, have as the start of the stream time. So I need to go and collect her from bus station and so forth. So that's why we are early today. Anyway, as is the case for the mid-month streams when they happen, it's basically straight into taking questions out of chat, and someone pointing out it's 8 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast. Well, good to know I haven't woken people up too badly then. Albeit it is a Saturday, I suppose some people might have been. So yeah, I'm basically just going to go straight to taking questions from the chat, and then we'll try and wrap it up around 6:30 UK time, so 2.5 hours or so from now, so that I can start the long and thankless drive to the nearest major UK bus terminal. Rocket Dog 2116 asking, how was it getting to hang out with Ryan and the Battleship New Jersey guys? Absolutely fantastic. Cannot fault them in the slightest. Absolutely wonderful crew. Absolutely wonderful ship. Really, really hospitable. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. Definitely want to go back. They they were even understanding of the fact that halfway along one of the funnel stacks, I did get a case of vertigo and couldn't bring myself to step beyond the safety rail without too much mockery. So that was good. Yeah, really, really fun couple of days. CTXSLPR asks, did you find churros? I did. I actually found churros 3 times. So I found churros. Someone in Boston actually found churros and brought them to me, which were delicious. I then found churros again in Disneyland in California. And then I found them again, I think in Wilmington, maybe? Somewhere down the southern part of the East Coast. And yeah, just as good as I remember. In fact, if not better. Especially because, you guys do things a little bit differently over there in the States in terms of, size of food portions. On Yorktown, we did get to enjoy a pizza that was quite literally the size of a coffee table. But yeah, the churros are of an appropriate size in the States. In the UK, they're very sad and small. B-Boy 12,003, are you planning a second trip to the States? Yes. Exact timing TBC, but probably around the same time as this year's trip, so it's kind of April-ish. But I might play around with the dates depending on how things work out. Pathfinder Frank, what was the most interesting thing you saw at the Smithsonian? Oh, spoilers. There were some things I was very impressed by. The funniest thing I saw at the Smithsonian was a Mark 14 torpedoes Mark 6 exploder, which didn't work. Which was, yeah, that was just the icing on the cake. It's like, this is one as a museum exhibit, and even this one doesn't work properly. Animal 16365, how was the traffic compared to where you live? Mostly not as bad. But to be fair, a lot of the driving I was doing was at hours when you wouldn't expect it to be, late in the evening or very early in the morning. The kind of the rush hours were most of the times when I was on ships. So, but no, generally traffic flowed easier than I would expect it to flow on equivalent UK roads at equivalent times, with the sole exception of the return trip via New York, where I stupidly forgot I basically took the George Washington Bridge instead of the bridge further north. And that was a mistake. That's how you get charged $20 for sitting in a 40-minute queue, whilst everybody apparently decides that lane markings are for other people. Adrian1231, yes, I have done a video on USS William Deepwater. Noah Clark, what are your opinions on the USS Salem? Very positive. Again, the crew of the Salem were incredibly helpful. And, it's not every day you get to climb through the entire fire system of a 8-inch 55 rapid fire gun from the turret all the way down to the loading area, with, explanations the entire way. Obviously, she could use a lick of paint and a little bit of a derusting, but that's the hazards of running a museum ship. And, that they're in the middle of a shipyard. It's not the kind of prime property location that they have for, say, USS Midway. So yeah, there's a few visual aspects that could use a bit of cleaning up, but I'm sure they're working on it, and I definitely can't fault the crew for the efforts that they made. They were again a really nice lot. Mark Bass said, "Did you go to the Columet Disneyland?" No, the Anaheim. Well, the Anaheim Disneyland, and to be fair, of the Anaheim Disneyland, we kind of, apart from a few rides, we kind of spent most of the day in the Star Wars section. So yeah. Oh, well, I think things are getting busy already. Sam Eric asked, did you get to go to the US National Archives? Unfortunately not. Our time in DC was actually quite short with the Smithsonian, and yeah, we when I planned it, I was kind of thinking along the lines of, well, these are the ships I want to visit, and some of them have other ships associated with them, so we'll go on the main ship, and then we'll see what time we have left afterwards. And a lot of the basically the entire time, it was, we don't have any time. We've seen the ship, and now we have to grab something quick to eat, and then we have to drive. So yeah, basically, if it wasn't on the main schedule, we pretty much didn't get to see it. Griffin Mattel, when you're going to Canada, are you planning on going to any of the northern states? Depends on exactly how things work out. A tentative schedule will be announced in tomorrow's dry dock, but in theory, if things go well, we should be able to pop over the border to USS Little Rock and USS the Sullivans. But that's in theory. If everything works out perfectly, anything else apart from the museums and the ships that we've got ourselves set to see in Canada, everything else is kind of up for grabs, again based on time. And I kind of want to have it a little bit more relaxed, because again, one of the plans that I had for the US trip was to do a daily, I guess a vlog, basically a daily record of what was going on, and then host that after we got back. But there just was not the time, because effectively everything would have been either, here I am on a ship, now you're going to see most of this stuff in the video, or it would have been, here I am driving a massive RV, at which point you probably wouldn't have heard anything above the roar of the road noise. To the dude abides, did you have a real Philly cheesesteak? According to the restaurant I was in, yes. And yes, it was delicious. Smiling Nid, Did you consider crawling through the 16-inch gun like Ryan did while you were there? I did. I saw it. Literally didn't have the time. But that is the plan for going back. I will go down that, up or down that gun at some point. Or the barrel, at least. Militaristics. How did you like American food in all its different varieties? Any standouts you'll seek out again? Yeah, Southern barbecue. I'm there. Cornbread. Definitely there for that. Seafood in Boston was actually very tasty, something I was not expecting. I thought, the UK being an island, you're never more than a maximum 60 miles from the sea. We pretty much know how to do seafood. It turns out there are even more ways of doing seafood. So, I mean, to be fair, a lot of the food I was eating was your standard, IHOP, Wendy's, all the drive-through fast foods, because we were on a really, really, really tight time schedule. But the American fast food didn't kill me. Knight 6831 actually has a naval question. He said, would it be fair to say that the UPAA rockets are a good example of when theory and reality don't mix? In a way, yes. The theory is technically good, the kind of aerial minefield, but at the same time the theory is flawed, because it's one of these things that theoretically looks good in isolation, but if you'd expanded the theory into full scale, you would have known it was a bad idea because of three-dimensional volume. Minefields in the ocean work to a degree, because although obviously the ocean is also three-dimensional, there are limits in terms of either the depth of the ocean or the depth that the submarine can go. That's less the case when it comes to aircraft, and everything's moving a lot faster. So, yeah, obviously in reality they didn't work very well. I think the UPAA rockets are a good way of showing tunnel thinking. If you look down a very, very, very narrow set of criteria, they work perfectly, and you follow that criteria, you develop them, but you miss the context, and that's what really made them not particularly brilliant. Screaming Wookie asks, I served on the USS Missouri. Did your opinion of that's the only one I haven't seen yet. Did your opinion of the Iowa class change after seeing them in person? I got a great appreciation for how complex they were. I mean, I like the Iowa class. They're not my absolute favourite capital ship of all time, but they're certainly in the top tranche, and they've always been, they're a good battleship. So my opinion of them as a class, I wouldn't say has changed dramatically after seeing them in person, but my appreciation for them as ships specifically and individually, and appreciating the size and the complexity of them as, I guess, engineering projects, that definitely has increased. But that's always going to be the case for someone who I think where the biggest museum ship I'd been on prior to going to the States was a 10,000-ton treaty cruiser, and then you find yourself on a 45 to 50,000-ton fast battleship. Jim Smith, thoughts of using proper firearms with Matthias and May? I really, really, really enjoyed it. Both, well, the day specifically, they're absolutely wonderful people. Couldn't ask for a better set of hosts, especially considering all the communications problems we were having in the run-up to the day, thanks to the fact that apparently American mobile phone networks believe in either letting you make phone calls but not accessing any mobile data, or letting you access mobile data but not making any phone calls when there's even signal. So, at least for a UK phone. So, yeah. And of course, it's the first time I've spent any kind of extended time shooting real firearms, so it was a steep learning curve, but a very enjoyable learning curve. And I think it's the same kind of thing with the ships. Your experience of doing anything, especially if it's for the first time, whether it's visiting a museum ship or using proper firearms is always going to be greatly influenced by the people who are helping you along in that experience. And as I said, absolutely can't fault them in the slightest. I had a huge amount of fun. And at the very, very end of the trip, also got to shoot even more firearms with the Maryland Machine Gun Club. So videos on both of those coming at some point. That was very fun. William Kiefer asks, I'm interested in seeing all the stuff that you have behind you. I can see you have dinosaurs, tanks, World of Warships, rubber ducky, a Corellian Corvette. Were you able to make use of the cornbread recipe I sent you? I haven't been able to make use of... Actually, several people sent me cornbread recipes. I haven't been able to make use of any of them just yet, because in the aftermath of, coming back, I haven't actually done a huge amount of shopping. I basically did an essential shop and then have been really busy. And then I was planning on making a bunch of cornbread to share with Mrs. Drack. Then Mrs. Drack's obviously had to go off to help her family out. So now tomorrow probably, when I've picked her up and we've got some time, we're going to go and actually do a proper shopping list shop. And I will be hunting down the ingredients for cornbread. So by the end of this month, I will have got some homemade cornbread, and hopefully it can come close to the stuff I experienced there. Mark Bass, have you considered moving to the US? I've thought about it. The main issue, to be perfectly blunt, the main thing that puts me off moving away from the UK is healthcare. I mean, I'm in good health at the moment, but Mrs. Drack does have a medical condition or two that needs consistent treatment, and I have absolutely no interest in engaging in a long-term living experience in an area where healthcare is entirely dependent on private insurance, because that's an easy way to go bankrupt. If it wasn't for that, then the US would be on my list of different places I might consider living, at least for a while. I mean, the thing is, there's so many things to see. I have actually talked with Mrs. Drack potentially about moving to the US for a short time, maybe a couple of months, at some point in the future. So it's not really living there, but it's, staying there for a few months rather than a few weeks, in order to see and do as much as possible, at which point obviously you have to bring over a lot more stuff so that I can continue making videos, because I can apparently make videos 3-4 weeks in advance. I don't think I can do 2 months worth of videos. If it was the people, the food, etc., I'd love to move to the US, but I also have to think practically. Anyways, Michael Patton, did you try an In-N-Out burger? No, that's the one thing I meant to try and didn't actually get around to doing so. In terms of William's other question about all the stuff behind, so I can probably raise the camera a little bit. Let's see. Cable. Right, there we go. So, Stargate, Star Trek, and other bits. What's over here? Remote control tank, dinosaurs, Stargate, gun turrets. That's where my laptop and some of the camera equipment lives. Stabby the swordfish. A very nice model of a tribal class destroyer that somebody sent me. The light is playing really annoying. There we go. That's the gold thing. Someone actually gave me that while we were in the US. Really, really nice 3D printed Drakenfell logo. And then, even more dinosaurs living up there on the top, along with some photos that I need to scan. And an adipose, which Mrs. Drack got me way, way back. Apologies for the terrible camera work, but I am holding a small digital camera over my head. Yeah. Everything's jumping again. I don't like it. Where are we? So just scrolling back up again. Eitan Rosen, if the British did allow for the Weimar Navy to retain dreadnoughts, which classes would they be allowed to keep? Well, I mean, given that they defaulted to you can only have pre-dreads, if anyone had kind of said no, you absolutely have to let them have a dreadnought, they probably would have let them keep the Nassaus just out of spite. To be perfectly honest, the Deutschlands probably gave the Germans better service for less cost than keeping the Nassaus around would have done. They, for a modern World War II fight, the Nassaus would have been almost equally as useless, except they would have cost a lot more to run in the interim. Josh Drennan, did many people know your channel? It seemed pretty much all the museum staff knew about it. And there was anything from a couple of dozen up to about 60 people at different meet and greets, so apparently people did. Night 68. Oh, and a couple of people did actually recognize me while I was out in public. That's the first time that's happened. I was in Mobile, and I can't remember which fast food restaurant it was, but yeah, just enjoying a burger after the flight from LA, and a guy who saw me eating, I was just like, hang on, do I know you from YouTube? And I was like, probably. and yeah, he was very polite and nice, but that was quite fun. Night 6831, would it be fair to suspect that Shimakaze's end came from one of her 3 5-inch magazines for her 5-inch guns exploding? Probably. I mean, her wreck is a mess. But they were able to identify the 3 quintuple torpedo tubes, which if the torpedoes had detonated, probably wouldn't be the case. So it could be possibly a liquid oxygen store aboard for the torpedo fuel that might have gone up, but yeah, it's more likely to have been a magazine cooking off, because that would be vaguely consistent with the wreck itself, and to be honest, more consistent with the fact of it needs to be something that's got enough explosive power to sink the ship, that's also not the torpedo launchers. Isaac Foster, how does it feel to be on a battleship? It's a very different experience to being on anything smaller. I think I may have mentioned this before, but it's when I went on Massachusetts, which was the first battleship I've ever been on. The first thing that struck me wasn't so much the length or the size of the guns. Obviously, having been on Salem, I was used to ships of considerable length. It was the beam, because on Salem, obviously being a heavy cruiser, albeit a fairly large one, you walk down a fairly narrow set of passageways either side of the ship. The superstructure is not hugely wide, and even when you're on the fantail, you can kind of look left, look right. Oh, okay, the distance beam to beam is it's wide, but it's not overawing. Whereas you go onto the fantail of a South Dakota class battleship, or indeed an Iowa or North Carolina, and it's very wide. It's kind of, rather than I'm on a ship, you think I could have a tennis match or something like that on here and potentially not lose anything over the edge. So yeah. And then once you get inside and you realise what a rabbit warren the place is, because I think this is the thing, it's like a couple of times I've taken subscribers around Belfast is, it's not a small ship, but I know the layout of Belfast well enough that I can basically navigate people without having to pay attention to any of the signs unless they've changed the routing. Whereas on a battleship, I don't even know where I'd begin. You can recognise certain decks by certain markings, but working out exactly where you are, etc., that's not a case of memorising the ship's layout unless you've been on it for years and years and years. It's more a case of probably learning the various coding systems the US has to work out what compartment you're in. Josh Thomas will ask, did you plan to visit the Sullivans before her listing issue, and any news of it? I wasn't planning on visiting her on this trip just gone because of the location compared to where everywhere else was. But the Sullivans has been refloated, and they're going through her at the moment. Last I heard, they're going through her to see what the scale of the internal damage is. As I said, if me and Dr. Clark get to visit her while we're there at the beginning of next month, then I'll obviously do a video about that, and how hopefully everyone can be a bit more updated. Mark Bass, he says he meant the Columbia at Disneyland. If you mean the ship on the lake, yes, we did see that and pop around it. Colin Cameron, do you have any plans to visit the significant Navy sites in South America? Maybe at some point in the long-term future. I really do want to go and see Huascar. And there are a few other places, obviously, but these things don't come cheap. It took a lot of saving to afford the trip to the States this time around. And if I've got a trip to the States next year and I've got this trip to Canada, going to South America is, it would be a fairly major undertaking, at least a 2-3 week trip. And yeah, I mean, on the other hand, they're on the other side of the world, on the other side of the equator, so going in the autumn-winter here wouldn't necessarily be too bad a thing. See, the main problem is if I do end up in South America, I will end up going to Bolivia, because half my family is from there. Well, by numbers, considerably more than half. At which point I'll just get distracted and spend 3 weeks in Bolivia, and they're like, oh yeah, I was supposed to be doing something else here. So, yeah. KP Yukun Matt asks, I haven't heard you talk much about modern ships. Would you be interested in talking about modern ships like the US Navy's LCS or the Dutch new destroyers? On this channel, no. On this channel, I have a rule of I don't go past ships that were built... Basically, I don't cover ships that were built after 1950. If a ship's service life extends past 1950, they'll talk about that. But I won't talk about any ships more modern than that on the channel to avoid politics and classified data issues. Because I do like to try and speak with some degree of knowledge and authority, rather than wild mass guessing along with the rest of us as to exactly what range a particular surface to air missile has. But if you want to hear me speculate about modern stuff, then the Bilge Pumps podcast is probably the place to go, where me, Dr. Clark, and Jamie from Armoured Carriers usually end up. That basically, with a historical background, we end up looking at modern trends and what should and shouldn't be doing, what people should and shouldn't be doing, at least in our opinion, anyway. SPR Ninja, or Sapper Ninja, I remember, says, it's 3 a.m, so I won't stay long. Why are the rear turrets of the Nurembergs offset from the centerline? This worsens stability. There's a bit of a grab bag of reasons. Part of it was for... with the Königsbergs, part of it was to try and get better arcs of fire forward. Part of it was because the ships were quite small, so they had to squeeze everything in terms of machinery space, propeller shafts, and guns, lengthwise as well. So, yeah, there's a variety of different reasons, but most of them are to do with the fact that they are small, lightly built light cruisers that are probably slightly over-armed for their size, and so that means compromises have to be made. Zoological Gopher says, Ryan over at New Jersey is very knowledgeable. Did you have any questions that stumped him? Well, I probably could have come up with one or two. I could have tried, but to be perfectly honest, again, when you're on a ship like that and people are giving you effectively whatever access you like, and they're donating some very precious time, you're a guest, and at that point, I'm just like, I just sort of sit there and go, yep, okay, you're treating me incredibly nicely as your guest, so I'm going to ask for access to bits of the ship. We're going to talk about various aspects of the ship and various aspects of naval history. But I'm not going to go out of my way to try and make you feel awkward because you're the host, I'm the guest. It doesn't feel right. And to be honest, also we were with the crew, like as I call them, of the New Jersey. So if there was anything that Ryan maybe didn't know off the top of his head, someone else nearby did. Corporal Tommy, did you meet Tall Tanker Man, the chieftain? I didn't actually. That's probably a bit of an oversight on my part. I have met him before at Tankfest. And who knows, if he's there at Tankfest this year, I might meet him again. I don't know if he is actually coming to this year's Tankfest. But, yeah. If we run into each other again, then we will talk again. He was a very nice chap when I met him at the Tankfest pre-COVID. Yeah, Rocket Dog 2116. How was driving on the correct side of the road? Well, I'm not sure about the correct side. It was an experience. The main thing was I don't have a problem driving on the other side of the road, to be honest. When the couple of times I've been over to France, driving on the other side of the road is not a problem for me in my own car. The single biggest issue I found was that, and to be honest, the American road system, generally speaking, the roads are very wide, so it makes driving actually a lot easier for someone who's grown up driving in the UK. I was quite amused by the fact people, especially in Boston, they were like, oh no, the roads around here are really, really narrow, you're going to struggle. And I was like, yeah, come to London, then we'll talk about narrow roads. Your idea of narrow roads is normal roads in the UK. But no, the main problem I had was I found that over the years I've picked up a subconscious habit of my lane keeping being that the dashed road markings where you've got multi-lane roads, I subconsciously keep just in the right-hand peripheral vision, kind of on the front right edge of the bonnet, which is fine if you're driving. That's fine if you're driving on the right in if the steering wheel is on the right, i.e. you're driving UK style. You see the lines going past you. Right, okay, that's fine, that's there. The problem is if you're driving on a left-hand drive car or an RV and you subconsciously want these lines to be just coming past your head like this, you end up either straddling two lanes, in which case people get very angry with you, or you end up hitting the curb, which makes you angry with yourself. So it did take a few days for me to get used to that. Fortunately, I didn't hit anything. Jim Smith, any tips on someone who wants to do a primary research via visits to the National Archives? Okay, presumably you mean the Kew National Archives. Tip 1, make sure you have everything sorted in advance. So you'll need a reader's card. If you don't have a reader's card already, then you need to include time and book to get one while you're there. You will also need to fill in an online order request form in advance. So find the reference numbers of the documents you want to look at. I think it's up to 12. And then you fill in your order form. They'll have those. And when they say, oh, yeah, we'll have those ready, you'll have your time and day slot. You show up. They will not let you take anything in a solid bag, so bring a clear carrier bag or something with you for security purposes. And then I would say if you're planning on doing any substantial research, looking at reams of files and stuff, I know the old school approach is take a notebook. Don't bother, because you'll be there forever and a day looking through your first document. So if you are doing a lot of research, then a lot of people will take a DSLR and some spare batteries, a digital camera, and they actually have runners, slides mounted to most of the desks where you can attach a camera looking down vertically, and then people, they open page, take picture, open page, take picture, so they can take note, they can record the stuff that they're looking at there a lot quicker. If you've got a decent phone camera, then for pictures and stuff, probably just use that. But for me personally, because obviously I'm there on a reasonably regular basis, I actually went and got a portable OCR capable book scanner. It comes on a little swing out arm, which connects to my laptop with a little push button. So I can really speed record. So I can just be there with pages just going click, next page, click, next page, click, next page, click, next page. And that way, I think the last time I was there, I managed to record something like 3,500 pages in the 6 hours that I had there. I'm still going through it, but it's a far more efficient way of doing research, although you don't necessarily get to learn all that much on the day, and apart from skimming each page as you scan it, you get far more content out of it for looking at later in your own leisure time. And also always say hello to the swans who live outside. Seafodder asks, now that you've spent some time in the States, do you think you would have survived your original schedule planned back in 2020? Probably not. Maybe if I was on my own, I might have. I mean, it's a little difficult to tell, given the fact that a lot of the stress and the tiredness were resulted from the fact I was doing an awful lot of driving, which I wouldn't have done if I was on my own. But in terms of the, overnight flights, etc., we did have a run which was basically that, coming back from San Diego via LA, then over to Atlanta, then down to Mobile, then over to Mobile, and then we had a night over Mobile. So yeah, that whole run, that was about 3.5 days, where I think I was asleep for about a total of 6 hours during those 3.5 days, which is probably somewhat representative of some of the worst sections of the schedule I originally had planned. And that was just, yeah. But basically, we got to Mobile, and I just went, no. we spent like half the day, half of the actual day, and the entire night leading up to our visit to Alabama, just flat out in the hotel, trying desperately to catch up on sleep and come back to some vague form of ordered consciousness. Fanderson UFO pointing out, if your paper's in good order, crossing to Buffalo is no problem. Yeah, my ESTA should still be valid, and I've got my passport, so crossing the border shouldn't be too much of a problem. Eric Knapp, how was driving the RV? It wasn't too bad. It could have been better. It was basically a mobile home strapped on the back of a Ford E350, so facilities in terms of audio systems and GPS were basically non-existent. It was kind of plug your phone into the charger, put your phone in a cup holder, and hope you can hear it, or wear headphones. Very noisy, basically no suspension. But it's an RV. Once you got to New Jersey and further south, south of New Jersey, and they started actually taking care of the roads, it was a lot less stressful. But I don't think I'd do it again unless I had a much larger and nicer RV, because I saw some that seemed to be kind of adapted from coaches and stuff, all built on the same chassis, and those are probably going to be a much nicer experience than driving than the one that we were in. B-Boy 12,003, if you're able to get time while you're in Buffalo, would you consider coming to the USS Slater in Albany? Again, entirely dependent on time, and Dr. Clark doing the driving. Ironclad Darkness, do you know if there are any 12-inch guns left over from Alaska and her sisters? I don't think there are. Uh, yeah, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. Says Drac, I was listening to a dry dock, but you talked about the fact you wanted to do the video about an awesome sounding man who re-enlisted at 70. Is that happening? Yeah, that is the captain, the man who was captain of Princess Royal at Jutland and then went off to fight the Italians in the desert at age 70 in World War II. I actually have his biography just here. I need to make a video about that at some point later in the year. Daniel said, have you made biscuits and gravy at home yet? No, I didn't actually find any recipes while I was in the States for those. So if anyone knows a decent recipe to make homemade biscuits and gravy, please let me know, because UK gravy is very different from the gravy that you guys have in the States, at least in that context, even if it is very delicious. Adrian1231, what was your favourite class of World War II German cruiser, and what is your all-time favourite ship before the 1980s? Well, ship before the 1980s is, as I've said before, it's either Warspite or Enterprise, depending on what day of the week you find me on. Class of World War II German cruiser, well, I don't have many options, do I? Basically, it's the Hippers, the Königsbergs, and the Deutschlands, and that puts me in a bit of a quandary. I mean, to be fair, the Königsbergs and the Nurembergs, or Leipzig's, very easy to rule out. Don't like them at all. But then when it comes to the Deutschlands and the Hippers, the Deutschlands are slightly less of an engineering inefficiency mess compared to the Hippers, but the Hippers look better. So aesthetically, the Hippers of the World War II German cruisers look the best, but then I also look at them and go, you've got a ship that's, comparable to a Baltimore in displacement and nowhere near as good. Same kind of problem as they had with the Bismarcks. So, as an engineer, it kind of ruins some of the aesthetic appeal. Whereas the Deutschlands, whilst they do have their issues, certainly in their final form with Graf Spee, they still look pretty decent, and they've got far fewer issues for me to complain about. So, favourite class of World War II German cruiser would be the Graf Spee flavour of the Deutschlands. Samarak saying there, as a National Archive employee, the best advice is plan ahead, says there are 44 National Archive locations in the US. Obviously, yeah, if you're going to the US, that's another issue entirely. Make sure you're going to the right one. Reading Railroad fan, were the R's worth the cost, or would the UK have been better off ordering another round of QEs but with small tube boilers? Small tube boiler QEs would have been a far better thing to do long term, but at the same time the R's were supposed to be kind of the slightly budget version of the QEs that could be built in mass numbers. Small tube boiler QEs would not have been able to have been built in the same numbers as the R's, but then again, given that the last 3 R's got cancelled, that may have just meant you get 5 small tube boiler QEs ordered and 5 built, which, that would have been a long-term much better thing. Although then what happens when, do we get Renown and Repulse at that point? Who knows? Pickleman says, as a cook in Boston, thank you. Well, thank you very much. I mean, yeah, Boston food. It was my reintroduction to American food, the first American food I've had as an adult, so it was a very pleasant experience. So make sure the TV doesn't go off. Patrick McNeely asked, if you went through the state of New Jersey, did you at least go through the beautiful sections, or did you stick to the turnpike and highways? Also, have you heard of the Hercules powder explosion of September 1940? I've heard of a number of explosions in World War II, factory explosions and munition ship explosions, etc. Hercules powder specifically doesn't initially ring a bell, but, if you showed me the incident, I'd probably remember it, because I'm fairly sure I've read about most of them. But no, yeah, I haven't heard of the Hercules powder explosion itself off the top of my head. As far as going through the state of New Jersey, in the RV on the way down, we were entirely turnpike and highway. On the way back up again, in a 4x4, we did go on some of the slightly nicer roads because, we could, because we didn't have to find somewhere that had at least a minimum of 12 foot on every bridge. Level 98 bear hunting armor. If a US standard type battleship had been made a museum ship, what ship do you think would have been preserved? Would, I think I answered this maybe on the previous live stream. If it was a would have been preserved, probably the West Virginia. If it's what I could have preserved, slightly different. Kendra Malma asks, we're getting a lot of food questions. Is the rep for English food that bad that we're getting a refocus for the channel? I just think that there's enough of a difference between American and British food that, it's certainly worth discussing, and it was something I did make a point of actually looking forward to. Salamin Shakia 93 asking about, when I met Ryan, were there any questions about naval topics that he or New Jersey's crew might have answers to? Well, yeah, they've got lots of answers, but one of the things that one of the many things that I learned while I was aboard New Jersey was when we were down looking at the exterior of the inclined armor belt, the 12-inch belt, because that was the first time I actually got an up close and personal, 6 inches away from your face look at a battleship's armor belt, which you can't do usually, obviously, for ships that have an external armor belt. And one of the things that he pointed out, because I was looking at it going, well, why does some of this in its form kind of look a little bit like clay or cake, and some of it look, like it's been worked with rock drills, the kind of long half-cylinder indentations. And what he pointed out was that obviously when they manufacture armor plate, they can't control precisely what the thickness of the plate is, but when it comes to finishing it off, when they're cooling the thing, they have to use it. Well, at the time they used a big asbestos pad, and when it's the kind of sort of cake surface appearance plate sections are where the thickness was either just fractionally below or on target for the thickness, and where it rose to be a little bit too thick, and therefore the armor would be a bit too heavy, then they took milling tools and milled off as much as was necessary to get it within tolerance, and that's where you see these half-cylinder streaks through it. So yeah, that was something I didn't know before. It was very interesting to find out. Ramal asks, how could a sail ship, steam or diesel engine ship decelerate, since ground vehicles would just press the brakes and use engine braking? On a sailing ship, you've got a few options. Furl the sails, and you will coast to a stop, because water does have a lot of resistance. You can also, as well as furling the sails, you can also maneuver the ship, because turns will throw off a certain amount of energy. If it's a smaller ship, you can put out oars to try and stop you. If you're in an absolute pickle, you can let go anchors, maybe have a sea anchor or something like that, which will also obviously provide drag. But especially on sailing ships made of wood, the sea is actually pretty good at slowing you down pretty darn quick, because it's very dense. Steam and diesel engine ships have a few more options. Obviously, they can put their screws in reverse. They can maneuver the same way that sailing ships do, but the ability to put the engine in reverse is probably one of the better options if they have to stop in an emergency. And if you really, really, really want to, and you've got a couple of rudders, you can do a barn door stop, if you like, which is basically turn the rudders 90 degrees and hope they don't shear off, and they act as giant air brakes effectively, except in the water. Smiling Nidas, was there anything you were able to help any of the museums with while you were there, like something you'd seen in a reference photo that they'd missed? There were there were one or two things I was able to identify, but to be honest, the museum ship staff are very good at what they do. So, and fair number of the ships have, especially the Iowas, have ex-crew serving on there as well. So, for the most part, they were able to, that they knew what was there just as much as I did, and obviously in some cases better because they work there. But yeah, hopefully over the next few weeks, as I send letters of thanks and stuff over to them, we'll be able to enter into correspondence about some things which we were discussing at the time. Islay Massive says, will there be more videos in collaboration with the New Jersey? Yes, if at all possible. I don't think I scared them off, so yeah, as soon as our schedules align, I definitely would be up for that. Iron Brew, of course, now in a cup that has a Patriots Point Museum cooler, insulator, grippy thing. I don't know what it's called, but it's very useful. Rocket Dog, will you get videos of your first time shooting? Yes, I say that will come. Probably get demonetized by YouTube for showing firearms, but hey ho, I'll put it I'll put it on Fun Fridays because it was very, very fun. Brian Richardson, are there any examples during the period the Channel covers of a Navy sinking an enemy flagship without having a Navy? Or is that only possible with modern missiles? Technically, you could argue the sinking of Blucher counts, because by the time Blucher was actually sunk, the Kriegsmarine had already basically sunk or captured the majority of the Norwegian Navy, so the Norway, apart from a few scattered survivors, really didn't have a navy left, but they still sank Blucher. And yeah, there are a number of other examples. I wouldn't necessarily say the flagship, but there are examples of nations that didn't have a navy or any substantial navy sinking some fairly major ships of various different nations that they were at war with, using their coastal fortifications, especially when the enemy was too overconfident and came sailing in. So I wouldn't necessarily say there's an exact parallel with some of the more recent events, but the idea of major enemy warship up against basically no surface floating opposition but still being sunk, that definitely did happen more often than not. Someone asking, the signal issues are not a problem in the UK. Well, in the UK there are some signal dead patches. I mean, the weird thing is there's a phone mast about a kilometre that way, so that'd be southwest of me. But if I go a quarter of a kilometre northeast, there's a little dip that the road runs along, and even though I'm well within signal range of that tower, there's no signal in that dip. But that's just because of the way that radio communications work. But yeah, at least as long as I have signal, which is in most of the UK, I have phone, text, internet, etc. Whereas, as I say, in the US, I had to pick between which one I valued. Warren Chambers, what's a proper firearm? Basically, not an air rifle, not an airsoft gun. Something that uses, actual explosives to propel things. Danger Nerd asks, regarding fire control systems, at their respective pinnacles, did the US or the Japanese have the advantage? Their respective pinnacles, the US, because they have radar, they have various fire control computers, very advanced ones, etc. If we're talking about purely optical systems, the Japanese optical fire control system in and of itself was probably a little bit ahead of the US one. But, in part that was because the Japanese continued to develop the optical systems because it was the only form of range finding system that they had, whereas the US, once they got proper surface search and gunnery control radar, obviously they could let off the steam a little bit with, figuring out how to put the biggest and nastiest and most well-made optical rangefinders onto things. Animal 16365 suggesting I should purchase a prepaid phone next time. It might be an idea if we could find somewhere that sold a prepaid phone, which was another problem because at least my network had roaming data on, so I could at least get something. My cameraman, his network didn't do roaming data, so they were looking for a prepaid SIM card or a prepaid phone, and they couldn't find one. Aaron Wheeler says, I'm planning on taking... Sorry, there's a flyer out coming around here. Aaron Wheeler says, I'm planning on taking a trip to visit one of the Iowas on the East Coast. Which would you recommend for a family with 3 kids aged 7 to 10? Oh, now, that's... So, on the East Coast, you've got a choice of Wisconsin or New Jersey. I would say how well behaved are your kids. Basically, are they the kind of kids that you would need to, here is a guided tour route. We're going to follow the guided tour route. We're going to keep very tight control over you because if we let you go, you're going to go everywhere and then you're going to fall down an escape shaft and die kind of kids. Also, do they need look shiny distraction? If that's the case, then Wisconsin is probably the better bet. Whereas if your kids are more along the lines of don't be stupid, okay, go, or stick close and then you don't need to worry too much about it, i.e. a little bit more independent and trustworthy, there's probably slightly more areas of New Jersey that you can get to. So yeah, it's a very fine line there. But they're both very, very good ships to visit. Thank you very much, Bob Fry. But yeah, whichever one, whether Wisconsin or New Jersey, I definitely recommend visiting them. About the only other thing I'd say is New Jersey is easier to park at than it is to park for Wisconsin. The flip side, of course, being that if you do park somewhere near Wisconsin, you can also see a bunch of the current US Navy floating around. James Loperman asks, how is it being Othiast? It's quite funny once you realise what's going on. And when will that come out? That's entirely down to when they finish processing the footage. And, they're very busy people. They've got a lot of footage to work from. And obviously they've got to run their own channel. So how long is a piece of string on that one? It'll happen when it happens. Rocket Dog 2116. Yes, I am. Just got to find the right people to be my references. Beat Morale Improve asks, could you recommend a good resource for learning about World War II era carrier deck and hangar operations? Oh, deck and hangar operations. Yes. So obviously Norman Friedman's US Carriers talks about it a little bit. Again, this is the problem with having moved my library upstairs. I know I've got a couple of books that would be really good for that, and I'd normally look over and see them, but now I look over and, well, they're upstairs. If you email me or DM me on Discord, then at some point, either later today or tomorrow, I'll pop upstairs and find the books in question and take some photos and send them to you. So yeah, please do that, and I will do my level best to get you those book recommendations. Eric Amborski asks, in terms of facilities and interiors, were cruisers just like a battleship, like the New Jersey Channel shows us, just scaled down? Not entirely. There is a certain amount of scale involved. Obviously, the engine rooms for a battleship and the machinery spaces are larger than those on a cruiser. A lot of the corridors and walkways on a battleship feel a bit wider than some of those on a cruiser, although not by a huge amount unless you're in one of the major passageways. There's no Broadway equivalent on a cruiser that I've come across, at least in the UK. I can't remember if there was a Broadway equivalent on Salem. That's basically the long passage fore and aft below the armour deck. Obviously, the magazine spaces are on a completely different scale and a completely different way of working on the battleships as opposed to the cruisers. And there are some other, interesting things that you get on the battleships that you don't get on the cruisers, like TV rooms, printeries, and so forth. And if you happen to get onto North Carolina, I'm not sure if this is the same on the Iowas, but certainly on North Carolina, that one of the major mess areas at the aft of the ship is actually the whole thing's on a slope, because it's right above where the rudder is, and the fantail coming up, which is just an inordinately fun place to be, because it's just grippy enough that you can keep your grip, but also slidey enough that if you make the effort, you can just go sliding up and down, and it's hilarious fun. Kazakov 166. In a ship fight, how much do evasive maneuvers matter? It would throw the enemy's aim off, but also of yours. Is it a good trade-off? It depends on the time period. And also, to be honest, if you're losing or not. Because if you're losing, evasive maneuvers are a very good idea. If you're winning, you maybe want to just, narrow your gunnery down. But as I say, it depends a lot on the time period. If you are a late World War II US ship with the latest and greatest in fire control, if your enemy's shots are coming near you, then you might as well evade, because it's not going to make too much difference to your fire control. It'll correct anyway. If you're in World War One, you do have a bit of a bit of a decision to make, because it will throw off your fire control solution a lot more. So you might cease fire whilst you're evading, because you probably won't hit anything. It also depends on the scale of the evasive maneuvers. Are you making are you not changing speed but just making, I don't know, a 20-degree turn? Or are you, slaloming the ship around, varying your speed, etc.? That would also influence the kind of decision you'd have to make. But those evasive maneuvers can make a huge difference. And now the thing is, you can maintain a relatively steady and constant rate of fire without having to worry too much, even if you don't have the latest and greatest US fire control systems in World War II. It just depends on how planned ahead your maneuvers are and what kind of maneuvers they are. So one of the oft-cited examples I talk about is Rodney chasing the salvos of Bismarck in the final battle. So that is Rodney, in a way, evading Bismarck's fire, but she's able to keep up her aimed fire while she's doing so. So in terms of, is it a good trade-off, as I said, it depends on how good is your fire control equipment, what era are you in, and are you losing, or is your enemy getting distressingly close to hitting you? Richard Goslin, have you ever done a 5-minute guide to the attack transports with the Coast Guard during the war? Not yet, but it will be somewhere on the list of things to do. There's hope for change. Thank you very much. Bruce Chambers, have you ever thought of doing a second channel for fun, doing similar content but for sci-fi or fantasy vessels, like Star Wars or 40k? I've thought about it at times. The two main things is, one, finding the time to do it, although, 5-minute guides to sci-fi ships, not necessarily that difficult. The other problem is that, with a 5-minute guide to a real ship, there's all this background. There's, why was the ship built? Why was it built the way that it was? When was it built? What are its vital statistics? What did the ship do? How did it compare to other ships of its period? All of this is kind of known or mostly known data. Whereas if you're doing it for a fictional universe, unless somebody has been very, 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 very extensive in working out the backstory and the world building of that universe, a lot of that stuff is missing in a sci-fi universe. At which point, or is very inconsistent and doesn't make sense. So at that point, you have to make a choice of, do I stick to alpha canon, if you like, what was presented either in the books, films, or TV shows, whatever the franchise happens to be? Do I expand it into beta canon with things like, supporting books, perhaps, that have been produced, or official websites? Do I expand it still further into head canon, which, might make a lot more sense and fill in a lot of the gaps, using my background in naval history? But then if you expand out into headcanon territory, you're going to have, canon purists come screaming around saying, oh, that's not actually how it is, you're just making that up, blah, 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 blah. So if you take, for example, Warhammer 40,000, let's say a Mars-class battlecruiser, the flavor text that actually describes a Mars-class battlecruiser, you could probably read out all the official data on one in less than 5 minutes. And there's no real information about why was it developed, who developed it, tonnage, length, that kind of stuff. You could make a plausible sounding thing for it, but as I say, then you might end up with people screaming at you that you've got it wrong, or you're making it up. So as a fun side project, I might consider doing it at some point in the far future. But if I was going to do it as a regular, weekly upload or something for a second channel, the other thing is, of course, sci-fi franchises, a lot of images and stuff will be copyrighted. A lot more recently, whereas doing pre-1950 stuff, almost everything is public domain. So, I wouldn't be entirely opposed necessarily to doing a kind of a second channel with 5-minute guides to sci-fi ships, if it was in some kind of official partnership with the copyright holders for that particular franchise. Apart from anything, obviously, then you get access to a lot more information and you get access to pictures and things. The main problem is, is someone from Lucasfilm going to want to talk to me? Would I necessarily want to talk to some of the people from Lucasfilm? Games Workshop are famously, eccentric with what they do with their IP. They'll apparently throw their IP at every video and mobile game producer known to mankind, but the minute you approach about any other media, they send you cease and desists. So even though I like the 40k universe, it'd be a bit of a touch and go thing there. Star Trek, well, Paramount, CBS, who knows what's going on with that lot at the moment. I think if I was going to do a 5-minute guide to any particular kind of sci-fi series, I'd probably just message JMS and try and do Babylon 5, because I like the franchise and he seems like a reasonable enough bloke. That might be something to start with, maybe. And also, actually, there's a fair bit of world building for B5, both in terms of the stuff that he's written and the stuff that's been published officially by people like Mongoose Games and so forth. So, yeah. Rod Ramez asks, did you try Big Red, the American knockoff of Iron Brew? I think someone offered me a glass at one point of it, but I don't really remember too much. I think I may have had some, but I don't remember what, if anything, it tasted like, other than it was liquid and I needed it. Chris Maverick, no, I don't think the news reporter... I don't recall speaking to any news reporters, so it wasn't going to be me that he was talking about. I certainly wasn't in the area. Smiling Nid, are you even in the conceptual stages of planning a Japan trip to see Mikasa? Whether or not I get to see Mikasa and go to Japan is the tail end of US trip Mark II next year, where whatever route through the US I happen to take will almost certainly go via... Well, almost certainly finish up in Hawaii, looking at Missouri, Arizona, and Utah, and Pearl Harbor generally. It's then kind of, what do I do then? I don't particularly fancy doubling back on myself, so going around the world is literally around the world is definitely on the cards. Excuse me. But whether I go to Japan and see Mikasa, or whether I go to Australia and extend the tour further to see stuff that's around there, or both. If I do both, I'll probably have to shorten the US trip a little bit. Who knows? That's something I still have to work out. And again, obviously, funding dependent. Thomas 1918, what museum ship would you recommend the most, and were you allowed to fire Constitution's cannons? With regards to the second bit, spoiler alert, you'll find out. You'll find out when I do the when I do my video on Constitution. In terms of which museum ship I'd recommend the most, you know, that is a catch-22 question. You know, in terms of the contents of the ships, every ship I was on, I was hugely impressed. And in terms of the treatment you get from the staff and the crew, in 99% of cases, I was also hugely impressed. So, yeah, I genuinely, you know, I might have personal preferences here and there, but if I was to say, you know, here in public, this is my favourite museum ship, you should go to this one instead of all these others, I would immediately feel hugely guilty and stupid because of, you know, basically throwing all the others effectively under a bus. I'd just say go to all of them because they all deserve support and they're all really, really, really good experiences. I didn't have, as I say, I didn't have a single negative experience in terms of walking away from a museum ship going, well, that was a waste of time. I thoroughly enjoyed every visit, and every visit I was going, I kind of wish I could stay longer. Scooter JSP, during the US trip, what new foods did you get to try, and what was your favorite? Well, you say cornbread, biscuits and gravy, American chicken, which actually tastes of something. I did actually go to a Five Guys to try and compare Five Guys in the UK with Five Guys in the US, and then I was driving for so long I forgot to eat my burger, and then someone threw it away, which made me very sad. But as I say, to be perfectly honest, in culinary terms, I was not the most adventurous when I was in the States, mostly because I was just scarfing fast food because that's all I had the time to do. Jim Rudolph, I have to visit Canada first to see what I think about it. Okay, that's just taken a huge jump. I'm not going to spend a billion years scrolling back up. So I'm just going to pick it up from here. Flying Dutchman, providing it's actually possible to determine, did HMS Warrior or HMS Dreadnought have the biggest overall impact on naval warfare? You'd have to do a lot of study to work it out precisely. I think in geopolitical terms, Dreadnought, because she kicked off the Dreadnought building race, and she is a bit more of a clear-cut obsoleting of everything that came before her, as opposed to with ironclads like Warrior, with things like Kaiser at the Battle of Lissa, the old wooden vessels did hang around for a fairly long time afterwards. So in a geopolitical context, Dreadnought definitely. From a technological perspective, I kind of actually think Warrior had a slightly greater impact on naval warfare, because Dreadnought was a new style of building a steel battleship, but they were already building steel battleships. And from Dreadnought onwards to, Iowa or Vanguard, you can see it's the same basic concept. It's actually the same basic power plant, the turbine engine, albeit now geared, just with bigger guns, more armour, better laid out, and obviously better fire control. Whereas with Warrior, the advent of armour from a period, obviously, where there hadn't been any armour, changed the paradigm so much. You went from, solid shot cannon to shell guns to, as in exploding shells, to armour piercing, muzzle loaders versus breech loaders, big guns versus small guns, high rate of fire versus low rate of fire. All sorts of weird and wonderful technologies were tried out for guns, disappearing mounts, Ericsson turrets, Coles turrets, barbettes, fully armoured barbettes. You went from simple expansion engines to compounds to vertical triple expansions, iron armour to compound armour to steel armour to hardened steel. So, from a technological perspective, if you go from Dreadnought to Vanguard, so what's that, about 40 years, and then you look at the technological progress from 1860 to 1900, the changes in technology and the pace of technological change as a result of Warrior is probably a little bit more than with Dreadnought, as in the differences of changes. But someone pointing out, all Walmarts have prepaid phones. Yes, but the Walmarts that we went to were basically like cathedrals of commerce. I went to try and find some hot food in a Walmart, and it took me 10 minutes, even though I was walking clearly in the direction of the sign, just to get there and walk back to the counter. So, yes, I appreciate the Walmarts may have prepaid phones in them. You have to find them. Target is almost as bad. At least they have slightly better signage. Cap 198462. If the Soviets had built a carrier during World War II, what planes would they use? I-16s or TB3s? I mean, an I-15 or an I-16 could certainly take off from a carrier. I wouldn't necessarily want to try and land one on one. I suspect an IL-2 would probably make an appearance, because it's already a rough field capable heavy attack aircraft. TB3, I think, is a twin engine. Let's double check. Yeah, TB3 is a bomber. That's, you're not operating TB3s off of any realistic Soviet carrier in World War II. Charles Henderson asks, will there be a 5-minute guide for the Brooklyn and New York armoured cruisers? Yes, there will be at some point in the future. Where are we going? So, Brick Muppet asks, USS in the US, the Erickson turret was a bit of a dead end, but did the Eads turrets of the Milwaukee class have an influence on international turret design, particularly with regard to steam-powered loading? It's a bit of a difficult one. So, the Eads turret in and of itself is also a little bit of a technological dead end. Obviously, all turrets of that time period are technically technological dead ends. The Coles turret survives the longest. But even that, in and of itself, in kind of the biscuit tin style turret, gets obsoleted. Then everyone moves to open barbettes, and then you go into fully armoured barbettes, building a gun house on them. But the Coles turret is the closest to what we now would call a modern turret, at least for World War One and World War Two. I think the Eads turret showed that, the thing is, even Monitor technically had a powered turret of a kind. So the Eads turret, I think, it kind of points the way to how mechanically complex later turrets were going to be. But it's more of I would say it's more of a waypoint than a direct line, if you like. Excuse me, just sneezed. Jacob Reed, that's a matter that Check the USS Iowa's YouTube channel about. I actually did say to them, I'm not touching that issue, apart from at the very upper levels, in which case, yes, you can. Captain 198462, did you meet the famous South Carolina roaches? No, but I did meet a North Carolina roach, which was living at the top of the North Carolina. Don't know what it was doing there. We sent it on its way. But no, I didn't. I think that was the only cockroach I actually saw. There's Hope for Change asks, does Ryan have any plans to go to the UK and visit museums there and connect with you on one of them? All the USS Sullivan's work is progressing quite a bit. Well, that's good to hear with the Sullivans. I don't know if Ryan's planning to come to the UK to see various museums and museum ships. If he is, I'd be very, very happy to meet up with him. But your guess is as good as mine at that point. Jim Smith, Space Dog answers a lot of these questions. Yes, he does. Space Dog is actually one of the things on one of the channels I subscribe to, because I do like sci-fi, and B, obviously, I kind of like the roughly 5-minute format. So yeah, Space Dog does a fair bit. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think it's Space Dog actually has a deal similar to the one I was kind of describing as what I'd want, but they have one with the producers of The Expanse, so they're able to flesh out the ships of the Expanse series, and then that becomes canon. So yeah, that would be the kind of thing I'd be looking for, because there are, depending on exactly which sci-fi world you're looking at, there are elements of world building in each of them, but you could make it from a naval perspective so much better. Of course, that would also require, if I was going to do, say, for example, Games Workshop, that would require them to actually, reinvigorate Battlefleet Gothic. Paul 48, have you visited the USS Olympia museum ship? Yes, I did. I had a very enjoyable time there, and yep, there will be video content from there. Canadian Pineapple, what are some premier tactics for destroyers, and is there a book on it? Because I'm quite interested in escort destroyers. I'd like to know if there's a book you'd recommend. Yes, there are books on destroyer tactics, but there's a huge difference between the tactics for destroyers and destroyer escorts. Destroyer escorts are what the UK would call frigates. So books on destroyer escorts are basically going to be talking about anti-sub warfare, whereas destroyer tactics videos, that's more about anti-capital ship warfare. So depending on which one you are more talking about, or which one, or maybe both, again, if you drop me a Discord message or an email, then hopefully over the next few days I'll be able to recommend which of the two you want to go with. Grey Ghost, did you see USS Nautilus? I don't think so. JF, have you read The Expanse? And if so, what is your opinion on the ships in the universe? I haven't read it. I've watched, I think, up to the end of season 3 of the series, of the Amazon series. I need to catch up on that, actually. I do like the ships quite a bit, and I find the universe intriguing, but obviously I do have to at some point either read the books or get the books on audiobook to obviously expand my knowledge of the universe. Grant Lee asks, what would crews do if they were in refit in another country? Would they just get leave? It depends on where they are and how long the refit's going to take. So, for example, in World War II, if a ship, let's say a British ship, has gone for refit in the US, if it's going to be in refit for a few weeks, maybe up to a month or so, they might be around on the ship a little bit to help out. But broadly speaking, they would be on leave because, you know, they're going to be needed again to man the ship pretty quickly. If it's a kind of multi-month refit because the ship's very badly damaged, then they may be shipped back home on a separate transport to be reassigned, because by the time the ship's ready to commission, they'll probably send out a new crew, or they might keep a core of the crew over there and ship the bulk of them home and then ship some new ones in later on. Grantley asks, what did you see beyond the ships on the trip schedule? Not a huge amount, other than the stuff that was listed as private. Obviously, some people already, most of you already know, I spent, as I mentioned earlier in the stream, spent a day with Matthias and crew of Sea and Arsenal, so that was great. The Maryland Machine Gun Club, that was also great. What else did I do? Maryland Machine Gun Club, obviously Disneyland. I got to spend a good chunk of a day with Vince O'Hara, the author and historian, who's been interviewed on the channel a couple of times. Really, really nice guy. Got to see a few places around San Diego that I wouldn't otherwise have been able to see or know about. What else did I do? Lots of driving. Stuff I saw in the Smithsonian, in the archive section, which will remain classified for the minute. Yeah, that was probably about the extent of it, really. Saturday Jams, yes, there is my predictions for the next division on Brother Monroe's channel. That is actually, I recorded that with him earlier this week, so that predictions video will come out soon. That's the kind of the divisions of building ships in Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, which is actually quite interesting, watching as the dev team on Ultimate Admirals actually increase the capabilities of the engine to get better and better ships. Scooter JSP, would you consider doing a video about the history of landlocked countries with navies? Sure. I can probably do a very sarcastic, very hilarious one about the Bolivian Navy, albeit that would probably take half an hour total if I stretch it. Trent McCartney says, do you think Yamato's armor scheme gave it the cheek armor vulnerability it has in World of Warships in real life? I mean, technically in theory, but realistically, how many naval engagements occur where, well, A, how many naval engagements occur at the kind of angle you need to exploit that weakness in World of Warships? Answer, basically none. And secondly, would in real life ships have anywhere near the accuracy to exploit that weakness? Answer, probably not. Uh, do, 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 do. Adrian1231 asks, is it length to beam ratio that makes the ship faster? Was South Dakota heavier than North Carolina? Officially, South Dakota and North Carolina are the same weight. Unofficially, there are obviously some slight differences. Length to beam ratio in and of itself doesn't make the ship faster, but it does help make the ship faster, because one of the things that determines ships' speed is its resistance to the water. The resistance to the water obviously depends on the amount of hull that's in the water and how it's aligned with the direction of flow, which is known as the wetted area. I mean, it's fairly self-explanatory what that is. And a ship that has a lot of volume but is more kind of even in its length to beam ratio, i.e. basically a circle or something approximating that, very tub-like, it's going to have a lot, proportionally speaking, an awful lot of its surface area is going to be a high friction forward facing environment, and it's going to have a fairly wide aft section, which can create a lot of vortexes. A long length to beam ratio means that the vast majority of the wetted area is running parallel or near parallel with the flow, which makes reduces resistance quite a bit, and obviously provides a fair bit of volume, so you can kick an awful lot of power out of the back with relatively minimal forward cross section. Yeah, Michael Clark actually making a really good point. Which ship to visit in the US really does depend on physical proximity. I mean, I was driving down the East Coast, and bearing in mind, when I was driving down the East Coast, I only got as far as South Carolina, starting from New Hampshire, and probably every 2 days I was driving enough of a distance that I would have done near enough the entire length, if not the full length, of the UK. And I know a lot of you guys in the US, especially some of you guys who came to see me, had driven 3, 4, 5 hours, and maximum credit to you, but apparently you guys think that's a reasonable distance to drive. But yeah, there are limits on where you can go. So if you're in, I don't know, Virginia, then by far the easier Iowa to visit is going to be Wisconsin. Whereas if you are in Connecticut, then New Jersey is going to be by far the easier of the two Iowas to visit. Jalu 3, I'm going to deal with that offline. Okay, so had another massive jump. Canadian Pineapple, do you recommend any books for destroyer escorts? Yes. Class histories are excellent for that kind of thing. So there's actually, I think that there's a book on Hunt class Hunt class frigates, which are basically destroyer escorts, only British. Let's find out what it's called. No. Okay, right, so the Captain class frigates in the Second World War is a good one, because that is basically American-built destroyer escorts, but in Royal Navy service. So, you know, it's actual destroyer escorts, but in a very specific context. If you can find a copy, there's American Destroyer Escorts of World War II by Peter Elliott, although that was published first in the 1970s, so you may find a little bit of trouble getting your hold on that. There is also US Navy Destroyer Escorts of World War II, which is an Osprey book, which, you know, it's good enough, but it's much shorter book. And then there's specific class ones. So there's the Buckley class Destroyer Escorts. That's a USNI book, so definitely just see if you can pick that up. And there's actually also specific books about specific destroyer escorts, like there's one about USS England, which is, you know, hilariously paradoxically named. Tyler, did you visit U505? Sorry, no. No, I didn't. I wasn't anywhere near Chicago. Knight 6831, yeah, Toadstool CIWS is a little bit past the channel's time period. Yeah, Mark Bass, basically, don't order chicken if you're in the UK unless you happen to be in Nando's. Some of the better KFCs. But, you know, UK KFC quality is variable, to say the least. Rich Gosling, thank you very much. And yeah, attack transports from World War II. They're definitely on the list. Hopefully I'll get to them this year. There is a very, very extensive list of ships to do. Scott says, to be honest, Five Guys Burger cold isn't much different from Five Guys Burger hot. Well, I'll take your word for him on the US ones. In the UK, a nice warm Five Guys burger is actually one of the best bits of fast food that you can have, in my opinion, at least. Especially, obviously, because they make it to your specifications. Ow. Oh. Joshua Federico, was Portugal's upgrade of the Vasco da Gama necessary, or would they have been better off purchasing a small battleship? For the money they had available at the time, the upgrade of Vasco da Gama was probably the better option. I don't think that they really had the budget for a small battleship. But when I cover that ship, I will be looking at it. Obviously, its life story in a little bit more detail. The only other thing I would say is when I've been doing some preliminary research on the Portuguese Navy, you really like naming things after Vasco da Gama. There's I've got an album of Portuguese warships from kind of the ironclad era onwards, and there's about 4. You're almost as bad as the Dutch with De Ruyter and De Zeven Provinciën. There's about 4 different Vasco da Gamas in that era. Tim Pimentel 3006, were you able to see USS Texas? No, I wasn't. Technically, I could have, but when I talked to them, they're in the process of getting the ship ready for moving. So I didn't want to get underfoot, and obviously there's a lot of stuff that's been stripped off of the ship. There's a lot of stuff where in parts of the ship which is now full modern equipment. So, you know, I thought it was better to leave them to getting the ship ready and then go and have a look at it in dry dock or whatever afterwards, as opposed to, you know, bothering them at a time where they probably really didn't need to be bothered. Thomas, 1918. When was Belfast's last dry docking? I think it was in the early 2000s. If I remember correctly, that was the last time she got towed away for work. And as an Austrian, how overwhelming will it be to visit her? I think it depends entirely on the luck of the draw as to when you go. If you get a day where the visitor numbers are kind of average or low, it's a perfectly fine thing to visit. As long as you're happy walking up and down a lot of stairs and ladders, you'll be fine, and it won't be a problem at all. If if you have the bad luck to be there on a day where it's absolutely rammed with visitors, it can be a little bit overwhelming if you have any even slight inclinations towards claustrophobia. And yeah, there's some of the passageways and things. If you want to stop and take a detailed look at something, you might have like lots of people just filtering past, which can get annoying. But if you, as I say, standing offer to people, if you do happen to find yourself in London, to be more accurate, if you know you're going to find yourself in London and you want to go and have a look at Belfast, if you message or email me in advance enough and schedules line up, which basically means I don't have an interview planned or I'm not going to be out of the country, then I will very happily pop up to Belfast to say hello and give you a guided tour. It's literally half an hour from where I live. Plus, there's a Five Guys around the corner. So, from Belfast. Stephen Shute asks, if the lower gun deck ports need to be closed for seakeeping reasons, what would the lower gun deck crew do? Would they work on another deck? It depends on what the situation is. If the seakeeping reasons are what I describe as long term, i.e. you're sailing through a major storm and those things aren't going to be open again for a long time, you'd have a minimal crew kept there to keep an eye on the guns, make sure they don't break loose, make sure the gun ports stay closed, etc. The rest of the gun deck crew would probably actually be brought up on deck or close to it to help keep the ship, with the rigging and the sails and all of that kind of stuff. If it's in battle, then aside from being used as kind of a casualty relief reserve, most of them will probably stay on the lower gun deck against the possibility of being able to open the gun deck later on. Brandon Judge, has the box of gifts from America arrived yet? That's a good question. I haven't had any FedEx or UPS customs demands recently. You'll have to email me about that. Yeah, when I was working for Croydon, there was a Five Guys on the high street, and that was always pretty good. And for some reason, deeply underpatronised, which was great for me because I could just go in and order whenever I liked. But yes, the quality of Five Guys does vary quite a lot depending on the workers they have. Some of the ones I've encountered in London haven't been too brilliant. Others have been really, really good. Hugh Gordon, was the museum ship experience different from Victory, Belfast and Unicorn? In some ways, yes, but then to be honest, the museum ship experience in the US varied so much from ship to ship that it wasn't so much that it differed from Victory, Belfast and Unicorns, because Victory, Belfast and Unicorn differ quite a lot from each other. It's just another set of differences. Scooter JSP asks, if the Imperial Japanese Navy had somehow won the battle and captured Midway, how were they planning to keep it supplied? Something similar to the Tokyo Express or something else? I suspect they probably would have had to put supplies on cruisers or something like that, given the distances involved. But to be perfectly honest, the Japanese plans for their final wave of expansion before they thought they'd dig in and wait for the US to come back with things like Midway, in some ways, when you look at the level of long-term planning for things like that, it almost reminds me of, a dog that chases a car. They're not entirely sure what they're going to do when they actually catch it. And the same thing with Midway. There were on-paper plans for supplying it if they managed to capture it. Whether or not they'd have worked, well... let's just say some of their supply plans were a little bit optimistic. Oh, the ice cream van is coming. So if you hear any music in the background, that's the ice cream van. Um, Griffin Metal, do you know much about the World War One destroyer HMS Radiant? I think it's confirmed she still survives as a hulk in Thailand. Yes, actually, I did. I did a video that covered the class she was in, and I mentioned that the last I knew she was somewhere in Thailand, and I think a couple of subscribers who are actually from Thailand said that she has been hauled out, if I'm remembering the right one, because Thailand actually has a surprising number of ex-British destroyers. If it is the right one that I'm thinking of, I think they said she'd actually been hauled out of the water and set up as a memorial, and someone sent me a photo of it, so I think she is still around. And as I said, there's been a video on her class. Loki, how did you like American sweets? I didn't actually have that many. Someone gave me a Hershey bar, and someone gave me a giant Twix, but yeah, I don't think there's candy for you Americans. I don't actually think I had that much of it. I was basically just stocking up on Iron Brew and fast food for the most part. Mr. AMMW, do you by any chance know of any bibliographical source that includes a list of cargo or transport ships by name looking specifically for Japanese vessels? You may be in luck, actually. I don't know about general cargo ships for the Japanese. I'm fairly sure there probably is one somewhere, but... Let me open... There we go. Ooh. Just going to open my Kindle, because this is one of the books I have in digital form. So many books. Yeah, so there's a couple of books by Alexander Batalov, Imperial Japanese Army Vessels Part 1 and Part 2. Now, that's not obviously a comprehensive list of every Japanese cargo or transport ship, but it does include every single Japanese Army cargo and transport ship by name and specification, which is going to cover the vast majority of the ones that were in active service in World War II. So it's a very good place to start with, and and then go from there. And Martinsky, yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing people down at Tankfest. I'm actually, let me double check. What days am I going to be at Tankfest? I'm definitely going to be there on the Friday. Check my tickets. Tankfest. That is not helpful. Okay, so I've got so I'm there on Friday, and then I have a I have the Friends of the Tank Museum ticket, so I can go there either the Saturday or the Sunday. Closer to the time for Tankfest, I'll probably do a poll of when are people going to be there, Saturday, Sunday, or both, and work out which of the 2 days is the better one for me to go for. Grantley, which is the area that had the worst traffic in your opinion? New York. Worst traffic, worst roads. There's a reason I looked at New York from the Staten Island ferry and didn't actually bother going into it. Patchouli Knowledge asks, just wondering how successful were turrets on the bow that face towards the superstructure to get one more gun on the front? So you're talking about things like, you know, Toneis, Miyokos, etc., etc. They were successful-ish. I mean, they brought a decent amount of firepower for the ships in question. There's a slight problem if you have your B and C turrets back to back, that obviously A and B therefore can, you know, swivel maximum 180 degree, well, less than so. Let's say for a normal engagement, especially on cruisers, which had most of these kind of gun layouts, they only have to swivel probably 90 degrees max to get side to side, whereas the aft turret has to do the entire rest of the circle to get on the same alignment. That is actually less of an issue in real life than you might otherwise think, because, you know, the rapidity of change of angles like that is relatively rare, but it is still something of a drawback. So in and of themselves, they're not too much of a problem. The larger issue is that if you are doing that, i.e. you're doing 3 twins, usually is how that is configured, you would have probably just been better off with a pair of triples. You'd have the same number of guns and less issues with manoeuvring. Monkey of the Smack 419 asks, if the Japanese had been smart and somehow destroyed the Panama Canal, would that have crippled America's war efforts in the Pacific? Destroying the canal is basically impossible. If the Japanese had the weaponry to actually physically destroy the Panama Canal, they wouldn't have had to worry about destroying it to cripple America's war efforts. They could have just destroyed America at that point. But in terms of destroying access to it, blowing up the lock gates and stuff like that, yeah, they could theoretically have done that. It wouldn't necessarily have crippled the US's war efforts in the Pacific, because, you know, much like the USS Oregon in the Spanish-American War, they could just go around South America, but it would mean the transit time is a lot longer, so it reduces the flexibility of the US's ability to respond, at which point it almost become a case of, if the US puts a ship in the Pacific, it stays in the Pacific. So that would have limited the US Navy's flexibility, but the other thing would have also been damaged ships, probably not the best things to go sailing around Cape Horn, the Cape of Storms, etc. So the shipyards at Bremerton and so forth would have been much more heavily loaded with shipping under repair, because you would have just had the West Coast shipyards. You wouldn't have been able to call on any of the Caribbean or East Coast shipyards for repairs to severely damaged vessels. John Young K says, Dr. Clark suggested the Royal Navy would have been better served if Nelson and Rodney had been slightly lighter armoured, but longer and several knots faster. What's your take on this? Basically, if they'd been the F3 battle cruisers instead, yeah, I mean, it probably would have been slightly better for the Royal Navy in hindsight, because, you know, the F3s had decent protection. They had good firepower, and being faster, they would have obviously been able to operate in a lot more flexible circumstances. You probably would have had an F3 going after Bismarck instead of Hood, so that probably would have ended slightly better for the Royal Navy. But obviously that is in hindsight. They didn't know at the time that the 23-knot battleship with the heavy protection was not necessarily going to be of as much use 20 years down the line as it would have been in the early 20s. So, yeah, with hindsight, yes, building an F3 probably would have been a marginally better use of the funding than building the O3, which became Nelson and Rodney. But it would have been a big roll of the dice for them to try and pull that off at the time. Thomas 1918 asks, why was the Japanese Navy so obsessed with heavy cruisers? Because they were basically... That was kind of the they were limited. They were strictly limited on capital ships by the treaties. Heavy cruisers had the ability to deal with almost all other kinds of cruisers, and if you made them big enough, mean enough, and treaty breaking enough, in theory, could deal with any heavy cruisers. And they had the size to also mount decent torpedo armament and so forth. So the idea for the Japanese with the heavy cruisers was that this would allow them to break the American fleet screen in a night engagement, and because of the American fleet screen, they don't have any battle cruisers, so it'd be made up of American heavy end cruisers, light cruisers, and destroyers. So the Japanese theory was, if we have enough really powerful heavy cruisers, we can smash through their fleet screen quite comfortably, and that will then let our destroyers and so forth in to wreak havoc with torpedoes, plus the cruisers can do some damage of their own with torpedoes. Whereas a well-built light cruiser would still be possibly somewhat at the mercy of a heavy cruiser. So if they were going to be obsessed with anything, it had to be that. Where are we going? All right, here we go. John 750T asks, I'm curious if you and Ryan of the New Jersey had a debate over your Hood video and the conclusions. We didn't get the chance, mostly because, the Sullivans had the temerity to sink the night that I got to the ship. So poor old Ryan was basically having to play triple duty as, curator of the battleship, hosting me, and dealing with all the press and the other circumstances arising from the Sullivan sinking. So a lot of plans we tentatively had for the evenings had to go by the wayside because he had other things to do, understandably. So maybe we'll have more of a discussion about it next time I'm over there. Martin Skeet, will you be bringing any merch down to Tankfest? I don't really have much. I don't really stock merch here. I could bring some posters, some Thunderchild posters or such, like if people wanted me to, I suppose. I do actually. The posters are the one thing I do actually keep fully in stock here, because that's entirely done by me and Mrs. Drac. So yeah, I could bring some posters down if people want. Tyler Kuhn, during the Age of Sail, what was used to defend wooden warships against termites, and have termites been used to attack or sabotage enemy warships? Not that I'm aware of. Termites, they were much, much more concerned with shipworm than termites. Then termites are not that common in Europe and other related places, and they don't seem to survive very well in a saltwater environment either. So yeah, woodworm and shipworm were much, much more of a concern. And to be honest, termites work at far too slow a speed to be used for anything other than the most long-term thinking of sabotage efforts. And I don't think anyone did that. Jason Lawrence says, you met the Imperial's airsoft team early on twice. Yes, I did. Very nice meeting you. Hope you kept the patch. I did. It's actually about 8 foot over there. I'm going to, well, I had a couple of other patches which were all given to me. You can probably guess where these came from, which I've had on my airsoft gear at the last airsoft match I was at, but I will be wearing that patch on the next time I go airsofting, wherever that is. Maybe at the end of this month, maybe next month, I don't know, depends on how timing works out. But yes, please do email me about airsoft stuff. That was really cool. Oh, 6 o'clock, right, okay. So where are we doing time wise? Okay, so we will have to start moving towards wrapping up a bit because, as I say, I do have a bit of a journey to pick Mrs. Drac up at 7. But it has been very fun so far. Ooh. Stay. Jalu3 says, what was Mrs. Drac's favourite part of the trip? Was it Disneyland, and what airsoft stuff did you end up shipping across the pond? Okay, so that's kind of a good news, bad news story. The good news aspect of it was Mrs. Drac actually enjoyed a huge amount of the trip. She actually enjoyed talking to a lot of you guys, those of you who showed up and ended up talking to her. And I think actually, bizarrely enough, I think for the people who showed up on the various museum ships to say hello, I actually think more people ended up having long conversations with Mrs. Drac than they did with me, because obviously I was off running around filming for most of the day, and Mrs. Drac was usually just chilling on the ship, which meant she had the opportunity to talk to people at much more considerable length. And then obviously once I showed up, I had to try and talk to everyone at once. So yeah, she enjoyed that. I mean, yeah, she's on a bus at the moment, probably somewhere just north of London, so I can't ask her. I'm just trying to remember which one. I think she really liked the southern part of the US when we were in Mobile, when we were in Charleston and Wilmington. That seemed to be the parts of the country she liked the most. So that's the good news part. In terms of what airsoft stuff did you end up shipping across the pond, that's the bad news part. Because on my way up from San Diego, we stopped off at the Evike store, or Evic, or however you pronounce it, which basically is apparently America's biggest airsoft store in Los Angeles, which I was very excited about. And they had a few things that I wanted to ship back to the UK, and I was really looking forward to it. And you know, the store and the selection and everything, that was all brilliant. I can't say the same about the staff. I really, really was not impressed. There was a guy at the door who was very friendly. I explained, I'm from the UK. I want to ship some stuff back. Can you recommend, how do I do that? Is there a way of doing that that I can talk to someone about? Now, okay, fair enough. He's kind of a door staff type person. He's not necessarily going to know that. So he said, okay, well, you probably want to talk to somebody who is, in the store about that. Okay, fine, fairly standard. So I went and had a look around, made sure I knew where the bits that I wanted were, then went to find a staff member and ask about it, and they had no idea. So they said, oh, well, you should probably talk to customer services. And I was like, well, I'm literally in your store. Can't you point me to customer services or a manager or something? And no, if you want customer services, you have to ring them. And I was like, okay, so I'm in your store. I can see your offices up above there. And you're telling me I have to phone. Well, I can't do that, as I mentioned, because I had mobile data, not phone signal. So eventually I figured out, okay, well, if I use Skype, technically that's mobile data rather than phone signal. So I can Skype call the customer services. And despite the fact the store was open, the customer services themselves weren't. And I was like, I can literally see your customer services department from here, but apparently they don't want to answer the phone anymore. And I tried it, and then I thought, okay, well, maybe that particular employee, he looked a little bit young, maybe he's new, maybe I should go and try and find someone who looks like they've been here a little bit more. And it just seemed the rest of their staff didn't care. They were not interested in the slightest. I mean, I went up to counters, I asked various counters, I asked for staff or for help, and I was flat out blanked by a couple of them. This was one of the very, very few negative experiences of the trip. So I was just left standing around going, well, I can see 8, 9 people who work here, and I spent 15 minutes or so trying to get various ones to, even give me the time of day so I could try and explain the issue. Because, there was a fair bit of airsoft stuff I wanted to buy and ship back, and they just weren't interested. They didn't want to help. So unfortunately, despite the fact that they technically have a bunch of stuff in stock that I would really like, and you can't get over, well, you can get over here, but no one here has it in stock. Things like the CO2 powered Webley airsoft gun. I couldn't get anyone to give me the time of day, so after a very disappointing 45 minutes or so, I just went stuff it and left. So in the end, I didn't get anything, which was a bit disappointing. Agent Pepsi 1, I will continue to make my videos. Sorry. Redshift, did you visit the workshop in Disneyland, build your own lightsaber? Yes. Yes, I did. Savvy's workshop, yes, that's, yeah. So I built my own lightsaber, and I built my own droid as well, which is quite fun. Scott Deedley asks, what was the most interesting new thing you learned on your North American trip? Probably just how much redundancy was built into US capital ships, and Salem as well. That was something I hadn't fully appreciated, especially when I was on Massachusetts and I was being shown, here's all the here's all the range finding systems, whether they be radar or optical range finders, and here's the primary one. But if this gets destroyed, then you go to this one, and if that one gets destroyed or the wires get cut, this one will kick in, and this one, and so forth. And it's like, well, and here's primary fire control, but if this gets destroyed, there's another fire control over here, and if that gets destroyed, there's another fire control over here. And the turrets of these ships, they have 44-foot long optical rangefinders, some of the biggest optical rangefinders that were ever put to sea. And it's like something like you'd have to lose 14 or 15 different other systems before they start falling back on those, which are still pretty good in and of themselves. So yeah, the sheer amount of redundancy, and that's just the fire control systems, let alone everything else. The sheer amount of redundancy built into US ships was something that I don't think I'd actually appreciated anywhere near as much as it deserves to be before I went there. Martin Skeet asks, where do we get t-shirts? Do they come in larger sizes? Yes, they do. At the moment, the t-shirts are on spreadshirt.com site, which unfortunately is obviously a US based, so shipping is an absolute pig for the people in the UK and the EU. I do need to set up to mirror my account over to spreadshirt.co.uk, so obviously then both of them will be open, so people in the UK can order shirts if they want to, without having to pay like the cost again in shipping. So I do need to set that up. Mrs. Drac is working on it, but posters, yeah, I can bring those. Right Sublet asks, did you get a lot of ship patches gifted to you during the trip? Some. There's a couple of them there, and there's one there. I got gifted some challenge coins and some other very nice things as well. So yeah, a few of which, well, all of which are being carefully preserved, and some of which I'm looking at and going, yeah, that means a lot. Some of them I'm definite. I mean, they all mean something, a fair bit, but some of them are. I look at them and I go, yeah, I'm not entirely sure I'm worthy of having this. So yeah. When the little display is completed, they'll probably join the the cavalcade of honor back here. Yeah, right. Sublet enjoyed talking to Mrs. Drac, so yeah, she did enjoy that. She was a bit worried about having to just sort of sit around on the fantail of a ship, because obviously she has a couple of health conditions. She can't charge around the ship quite as much as I could, so she stayed topside for the most part. But yeah, she found everyone generally really nice. Jim Smith says, are we going to get an Airsoft Fun Friday? Yes, eventually. I've got a bunch of footage, mostly from one of my visits to Imperium Airsoft, some bits of footage from a couple of others. I'm going to try and get a little bit more footage the next time I'm there and round it all out, because I've got some really, really good drone footage, a lot of prep footage as well. But the majority of the stuff I had at the last that I filmed at the last skirmish game, it's fairly good and fairly exciting. But I did spend an awful lot of those games basically charging at people with shotguns and P90s and AKs. So yeah, there's a lot of that. I want to get a little bit more tactical footage as well, before putting together a really nice one. But yeah, there definitely will be an Airsoft Fun Friday, at which point, well, again, realistic firearms probably get demonetized, but never mind. Right. Super 64, given the context of those comments, this was when I was talking about visiting the e-bike store in LA. Hideous. To be honest, in airsoft terms, I'd settle for either Webley, because I'm in the process of putting together a World War One, World War Two kit to run around in airsoft with. So I've got a Sten, I've got a Sterling, I've got a Lee Enfield, so I need a Webley. I've got some 1911s as well, so I've got a decent amount of World War Two era. Oh, and an MG34, MG or MG42, which can be a captured thing. So yeah, I've got, and a bar. Yeah, so I can put together a BAR. So I can put together a fairly good World War Two era airsoft setup for fun times. I mean, I'll probably beat running around dual-wielding P90s, which is... I still think it's hilarious, but some people are probably getting a bit fed up of it. Monkey of the Specs says, I can still remember you meeting the Chieftain and your channel was slightly blowing up from that years ago. Yeah, I do remember that. That was quite fun. Wonder how well the Chieftain would do on bilge bumps. He'd probably do all right. He can bring a ground perspective to things. I still need to do a collaboration with him. I actually have a few incidents that I've lined up where ships fought tanks, with kind of mixed wins on both sides. So I've got the outline of what I'd like to do as a collaboration with him. I just need to A, find the time to flesh it out a bit more, and then B, make sure that he's up for it. Right, okay, so I need to leave in about 5 minutes, so let's get the last few questions around. Da, 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 da. Canadian asks, any news on the Canada Hyder trip? Yes. So listen to the end of the dry dock that's going up. Well, for patrons, going up later today, and released to the general public tomorrow. That's got the outline schedule for Canada on there. So yeah, so that's probably the best place to find that, and then I'll post a finalised version once we've neatened up the spreadsheet. Andrew Brooks says, would Admiral Rickover and the birth of America's nuclear navy be outside the scope of your channel? Yes, unfortunately, it would. It's a very interesting subject and something I've read about a fair bit, but it does fall outside the scope of the channel. USS Grey Ghost. How would the USS Texas, after her final refit in World War II, affect the Battle of Jutland if they joined the British after being magicked into there? The radar would be them again with all of the almost any substitute a ship into the Battle of Jutland. The radar, if they've got it, is going to be the most decisive thing because it sees through the murk and the mist and basically gives whichever side has the ship, in this case the British, the scouting that they physically couldn't have at Jutland, and therefore they know where the enemy's going, they can adjust, and thus the battle changes massively. Fantasy UFO says Ryan and Drac could share some live streams, maybe. Yeah, it could do. It's an idea. So, oh, and actually now since this stream has now obviously been done, then I suppose it's probably a good place I need to announce. People on Patreon already know this. On Wednesday the 1st, so we've got a Wednesday video coming up on the 25th, this coming Wednesday. On Wednesday the 1st, which is going to be the last Wednesday before I head off to Canada, you won't have your regularly scheduled Wednesday video coming at 12 o'clock UK time, or whatever time that equates to in the US, depending on which time zone you're in, at 2100 UK time. So I think, if I remember correctly, that's going to be minus 5 or 6 hours. It's going to be about mid-afternoon East Coast time, late morning lunchtime West Coast time. Because it's near enough close enough to the anniversary of the Battle of Midway, we're going to have the return of John Partial, who of course wrote the excellent Shattered Sword. So we're going to be doing a Midway themed live stream with him, kind of like we did last year, instead of that week's Wednesday video. So hopefully everyone will enjoy that. And yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to it. And we get to enjoy all of this. We get to enjoy John's knowledge and me chiming in occasionally and reading questions. The only thing, obviously, as a takeaway from the last one, please try and avoid the alternate history. Like, what if X was present at Midway? We'll try and keep it a little bit more to the historical side of it. But other than that, yeah. Enough Rope says, is that a Stargate on the shelf? It's actually two. There's the Lantian gates from Stargate Atlantis. There's one there, and there's a more traditional Stargate on that side. Jim Smith says, Akimbo P90, how much rum have you been drinking? Akimbo P90 is hilariously fun in airsoft, especially when you've got one that's a Tokyo Marui high cycle. Thank you very much, Aluminium Fence. It was a pleasure to meet everyone on the various ships, including, of course, New Jersey. Trent McCartney says, when you visit Missouri, be sure to ask about the time in the 80s she won a war game against the Franklin Delano Roosevelt by hiding in bad weather. Yeah, I will definitely do that. Ramal, have you read the book Thunder Below? If yes, thoughts about the book? I don't think so. Yeah, John Barradell, to be fair, that incident at Evike was, that was one of only maybe 2 or 3 total negative incidents in the States. Literally almost every other interaction I had in the States was really nice, whether it be the staff and curator staff of the ships, the subscribers who showed up to say hello, even the staff of the hotels and the campgrounds that we stayed at were generally all really, really, really nice. Yeah, I mean, someone as a Kazakov's 166. Yes, I'll acknowledge the existence of Azia Lane. I don't necessarily have to like it. yeah, I mean, to wrap it up on an interesting note, because yeah, now I'm skating time quite close. Fushi Smith asks, what are the best and worst things you noticed about the former British colony known as America? The absolute best thing, I think, is, if it's one thing, I'd have to say it's the people. I think it kind of plays into a theory I have that you guys tend to export. The Americans seem to export their most obnoxious people, because in my younger days, when I went, if I went to somewhere like, say, Kenya or various countries in Europe and stuff, almost all the time, if you ran into Americans, they were a walking stereotype. Outmassing a small moon, rude, obnoxious, loud. In Kenya's case, scaring the flipping wildlife left, right, and centre. And then wondering why there was no wildlife. Well, I'm sorry, but if you walk around like a human foghorn, of course they're all going to run away. Yeah, I've got a lot of angry stories about that. Or when I went to Bolivia, amusingly enough, keeling over and wheezing like a broken bellows when, it turns out that no, there isn't as much oxygen at 8,000 feet above sea level as there was at 0. And of course, me with half Bolivian genetics laughing the whole thing off. But that seems to be your export grade American. Some Americans who come overseas are quite nice, but a vast majority of overseas tourist Americans are really not good representatives of the country. And then you go to actual America, and yeah, as I said, everyone from the hotel staff to the flight attendants to the museum staff to the subscribers to the most of the people on the streets are just really friendly, and really pleasant to be around, and usually quite happy. And yeah, that was the best thing. I genuinely felt like people were happy to see me, and most interactions were nice and polite. It was that was really good. It took a huge amount of stress off of things, especially when people are like, you're British, and then usually had some funny anecdote to share. Obviously, the subscribers knew I was British, but the people in say the hotels and restaurants and stuff, they're like, a British person, and then they were quite nice about it. And yeah, the worst aspect, I'd say the two joint worst aspects were probably, that customer experience in LA, and one or two other issues I had while I was on the West Coast, which were kind of similar in terms of personal interactions, and the state of the roads anywhere from New Jersey northwards. I mean, New Jersey itself, the roads are okay, but anywhere north of that, so New York, state of New York and further north, I don't know why everybody thinks in the northern part of the East Coast that they have to recreate the Battle of the Somme in concrete and call it an interstate. But it was interesting, to say the least. But yeah, I'm genuinely looking forward to coming back to the US next year and meeting some more people and seeing some more ships. And so with that, I will wrap up this wrap up this stream. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and hope to see you all again in another live stream or another video, as the case may be. If there is a general naval chat next month, which will very much depend on what state I'm in after coming back from Canada. If it's around, it will be on the 18th, and obviously then we'll be back straight to taking naval-related questions only. And then look out over the next few months as I do videos, probably Wednesday videos on the ships that I visited, and Fun Friday videos on some of the other stuff I did. So yeah. See you all later.